Have you ever added a string part to your track only to find that it sounds lifeless, dull, and kind of fake? It's frustrating because strings are supposed to add drama and emotion. They're not supposed to suck the life out of your song. But here's the thing, most people don't realize it's not their sample library that's the problem. It's how you're using it. In this video, I'm going to take you through my exact process I use to turn dull and boring tracks into lush, expressive arrangements that sound almost like live string parts. By the end, you'll know how to create strings that elevate your track rather than dragging it down. So to demonstrate this, we're going to dive straight into Ableton, and I'm going to show you my step-by-step guide. So every string part, unless it's the entire part of the song, is doing something to support a melody. So here's the melody we're going to use. Step 1, simple chords. The very first string part I've done is just recorded a really simple C major, G major, A minor, and F major. So if you take a look at the notes here, they are just simple triads like you would play them on a keyboard. So 3 notes in the right hand and 2 notes in the octave in the left hand. So the first thing to say is that all of the notes are the same velocity and they're all perfectly aligned to the grid, so they're quantized. That sounds dull, boring, and lifeless, I think. Step 2, improve the voicings. This is one of the most impactful changes you will make. So actually, the thing you're doing here is you need to imagine that you've actually asked a string quartet to play this. Generally, in a string quartet, understandably, there are 4 notes: cello, viola, violin 1, violin 2. So what that now means, in those chords you saw me playing earlier, there were 3 notes in the right hand, 2 notes in the left hand. That's 5 notes, so a string quartet can't play that. So actually, we need to think about the voicings that those instruments can play. And the other thing you'll notice is by just moving up and down robotically like chords, that's not actually that good for the string players. They won't want to play like that. So if you can think about the notes moving, not in huge jumps each time, but almost creating a little bit of a melody on their own. Let's see how that looks. Here are the notes. So the top note, the violin, is C, B, A, C. So those notes are much cleaner. They're not jumping around all over the place. So for the cello, the notes go C, G, and then A, and you'll notice it holds the A all the way to the end of the 2-bar phrase. We could have moved that A down to F to make it an F root note, but by holding it as an A, it creates an inversion. So it's a first inversion. So an F chord with an A in the root note is called a first inversion, and string quartets do that all the time. See what it sounds like. One more. So you'll notice it actually sounds a bit thinner than the original sound. So the first strings were very full and very kind of all-encompassing. This is a thinner, subtler, but much more effective sound, in my opinion. Step 3 is counter melodies. Your strings don't just need to play chords. You can make them actually have a sound and a voice of their own within your arrangement. And the way I like to think about counter melodies is that they are counter melodies. You don't just want to copy the main tune that's being sung or the main tune that's being played. So I normally wait in my arrangements for when there is gaps or pauses in the melody when it's breathing to then introduce my counter melodies into my string part. So what you'll notice here is the top. The violin 1 has some extra notes in it. It goes C, B, A, B, C, G, which basically gives it a much more interesting flow. And if you listen to these 2 parts, you'll hear how that top part plays alongside the melody of the piano. And now in this counter melody, you'll see that I've also introduced an element of disharmony. So you can see on this note here that there is a B that's held, and in the second bar, the B and the C are held together. So actually 2 notes that are semitone apart don't normally sound very good, but here it's like a temporary tension that's resolved when the note moves down to an A. And again, it's a counter melody, but it's creating that tension and release. So have one more listen to that and focus in on that disharmony and see what you think of that. So I hope that's interesting. Already we're now starting to create a piece that almost feels like it's moving against and with the melody. So the melody's playing, it was the main part still, but the strings are supporting it, giving it a really nice vibe. Number 4, chord each part separately. You know how I told you that you need to think of your string part like a string quartet? Each player in that string quartet is effectively playing one line as they go through their part. So the next thing you need to do is record on a MIDI keyboard each individual part that you've written separately. Okay, so firstly, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to the previous one that I'd recorded, where actually these were all MIDI notes with exactly the same velocity, and I want to show you something. Watch how, when I lift up this little window here, this shows you the velocity of all the notes, and they are all identical. They're all at velocity 100. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move along and have a look at this. So here we can see I've already introduced some velocity differences between each of the notes. So that means some of them are louder, some of them are quieter, and you get that when you play it yourself on a MIDI keyboard. And you'll also know, you can see it here, but you can also see it if I just hide this a little bit further and we look back at the notes. They are not perfectly quantized and lined up with the grid. When you do this, you get natural human sounding parts. Let's listen to see how that sounds. Now, I wouldn't be too surprised if you can't hear much of a difference between that and the previous one. It's very subtle, but it will make a difference throughout a whole piece. You've only got 2 bars there. If you have a longer string part, and what you would normally do is just record a simple set of chords and then repeat those 2 bars over and over and over again. What you'll find by doing this is it does not sound as robotic, and it definitely makes a big difference. It's starting to sound really great. If you want to get your tracks to the next level, I would recommend you think about getting a LANDR Studio subscription. There's a link in the description that will get you some money off, but I'd really recommend you having a look at it, because not only do they offer you unlimited releases in a year, but you also have AI mastering, which will save you tons of money. And I actually didn't realize this, but the plugins that they have are incredible, and I use them in all my songs now. So I'd definitely recommend it. So check out the link in the description, and let's get back into these strings. Number 5. Now, I know I told you it's not your sample library that's the problem, but I am also going to make you use your best sample library that you have, and I want you to hear the difference between the two. So what I had before was a bog standard MIDI string sound, but now I'm using the Spitfire string quartet, which comes as a pack, which you can purchase, or it comes with some of the higher versions of Ableton. What's really good about this particular string sample is that you have dynamics and technique and all of these parameters. And we'll get into these in a second, but these are the things that you can tweak and play around with that will make a big difference to your sound. So anyway, let's just take the exact same MIDI recording we had previously. I'm going to play it once through with the Ableton sound, and then I'm going to play it once through with the Spitfire. Let's go. So this is the Ableton sound. You hear the difference? Step 6, articulation. Using string articulations will really bring your string parts to life. String players don't play the same volume or the same power on every single note, and they can also increase and decrease the volume of their playing as they go. So that is what will make a massive difference. I'm going to show you. So here, across the exact same MIDI part, so I am now using the Spitfire sounds with the exact same MIDI part that I recorded. And what I've got here is I have 2 parameters of the Spitfire sound that I am playing around with. I'm playing around with dynamics, and I'm playing around with technique. And you can see on this screen, this red line here is the change in those parameters that's happening. I've just drawn these in based upon having a little listen and what sounds good. But the dynamics are the volume of the note. So each note is now growing in volume. And then this little phrase here grows in volume to the end and then falls away. That already is kind of how a string player, in my opinion, would play. But you would play around with those parameters as you wish. Let's listen to what this sounds like, because I think this is going to sound pretty cool. Without the articulations. So this is starting to sound really, really amazing. But step 7 is to have 1 instrument per voice. So I'm now going to split out the 4 notes that I've got in one MIDI part into 4 separate MIDI parts, and then have 4 different sounds playing each of those parts. And again, this comes back to trying to emulate a string quartet. Every single player has a slightly different violin. They play slightly differently. And if you have them all using exactly the same string sound, then you lose a little bit of that human touch. How I'm doing this in Ableton, I've created a group track. So if I press this button here, it will open up these 4 sounds here. So you can see in each of these, I've got 1 note. So this, I think, is this must be the cello, I guess. The viola, violin 2, violin 1 with that melody you remember from earlier. So while I'm here, not only did I split out the MIDI part, so I've got 1 note per instrument, I actually went ahead and redid the dynamic changes. So remember, I was using the technique and dynamics in the Spitfire lab, in the Spitfire sound library. I've actually created bespoke envelopes for each instrument. So I really then am now thinking about this violin player. They would go loud there, they would go quiet there, and you can just overlay that over the top. So let's first listen to all the instruments grouped together, and then let's listen to them split out. So here are them grouped together. Split out. Again, it's quite a subtle change, but as you can see, it didn't take that long for me to implement that and put that together. So that is already now making our string sound really starting to become human again, and that is what you're looking for. Number 8, panning. So again, think about a string quartet. They're not sitting identically in the same place. They're spread around. Their chairs are often in an arc. So if you want to replicate that, you need to pan them slightly differently in the mix. So let's look at that in Ableton. You can see I've panned the cello. Here are my 4 parts here. I've panned the cello slightly to the left, viola slightly to the right, violin 2 further to the left, and the other violin further to the right. So I'm firstly going to play you it without the panning, and then I'm going to add the panning in. Let's go. Now with panning. And the final part is reverb. No string quartet is sitting in a completely lifeless room. And if you want to use it really effectively in your mix, you need to think about how you're giving it some life with some reverb. You can also do some stuff with EQ as well. I'll play it to you without the reverb, and then I'll play it to you with. So without the reverb, with the reverb. So I hope that was interesting. I'm now going to play you the first set of string chords that we recorded that were me just playing like a pianist with the normal triad chords. And then I'm going to play you the final fully changed, reverbed, voiced string sounds so you can hear the difference. So here is the original string sound. And the final mix. So I hope you can hear the difference. We've really made a massive change to a very boring string part. We've made it come to life, and it sits much better in the mix. And you can follow each of those steps in your own order. You can create your own workflow, and that will make your strings sound much better. Step 10, the final step if you want to improve your string sound in your recordings, is hire some live players. I'm joking slightly because this video is all about how to make MIDI strings sound better, but there is nothing like live players. So if you have the money, that is a way to really, really absolutely smash out your string parts. And if you want further ideas on how to improve your productions, check out this video here.